Welcome to Galactic Nova Stories, where cosmic emotions come to life. Your journey begins now. The docking bay was dying. Panels flickered overhead in spasms of failing light, casting long broken shadows over the floor. Air recyclers wheezed in the walls, their breath labored, like the last gasps of a forgotten titan. Every few seconds, a faint creak echoed through the skeletal remains of the once proud station, as if it remembered being alive. Commander Elias stepped through the shattered threshold, boots crunching against scattered debris. His breath misted in the thin, chilled air, even through the heated fibers of his uniform. Beyond the safety rail, suspended just before the magnetic boundary that kept the void at bay, was her. She floated like a fallen star, skin shimmering, with a sheen of metallic silver, hair drifting around her in a soft halo. The soft bioluminescence that clung to her body pulsed gently, in rhythm with something unseen. She didn't notice him at first. Her gaze was distant, lost somewhere far. Beyond the station, beyond the stars themselves, a tear, a real tear, detached from the corner of her luminous eye and floated, spinning in slow, perfect arcs. A weapon, they had said, a threat, a thing to be used. He had expected rage, power, destruction. He hadn't expected to find her crying. His heart stumbled. His hand instinctively reached out but stopped midway. What was he thinking? One step closer could trigger every security protocol on the station. It could mark him as a traitor, but none of that mattered now. Aria, he breathed. Her name, the one they had filed away in some cold archive beneath warnings and redacted reports. He hadn't even realized he had memorized it until it fell from his lips. At the sound, she turned. Their eyes met, hers wide and ancient, holding the sadness of forgotten civilizations. A shudder passed through her, delicate as the tremor of a falling leaf. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, voice like the breeze slipping through a broken window. Elias forced a breath into his lungs. "Neither should you." Silence closed in around them. The bay, the station, the entire galaxy seemed to fade into a single suspended breath between two strangers who somehow already knew too much about each other. She recoiled slightly, arms curling. Around herself, as if shielding from a blow that never came. Her fingers twitched, dancing across the invisible energy field that caged her in. He saw it now, the thin, almost imperceptible lines across her skin. Not tattoos, not armor, restraints, biomechanical etchings designed to control. They hadn't just created her. They had imprisoned her. Slowly, careful not to startle her, Elias crossed the distance. He moved the way he would approach a wounded animal, measured, open-palmed, heart pounding so loudly he thought it might echo off the walls. He stopped a few feet away, dropping to one knee to lessen his size. His eyes never left hers. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice cracked with something he hadn't expected, grief. I needed to see for myself." Aria's lips parted, the beginning of a reply, but no words came. Only another tear, heavier than all the data files and mission reports in the world, drifting slowly into the cold air between them. It reached him, brushed his cheek like a benediction, warm, real, human. He exhaled shakily. Without thinking, he lifted his hand, hesitant, trembling. A plea, a question. Would she trust him? At first she flinched. The lights flickered harder, sensing her distress. But then, with a fragility that made his throat ache, she extended her fingers towards him. Their hands touched, a shock, but not of fear, of recognition. As if their skin remembered each other from another life, another reality. Her skin was cool, faintly humming with a frequency he couldn't quite hear but could feel thrumming in his bones. His thumb brushed the back of her hand in a silent promise. "I'm not afraid of you. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Galactic Nova Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you." Aria blinked at him, wide-eyed, studying his face as if trying to decipher some hidden code. He wondered what she saw. A soldier, an enemy, a fool, Her voice came again, softer than before. "Why are you not afraid?" Elias swallowed the lump in his throat. "Because you're not what they said you were." A shaky, broken laugh escaped her lips, one so filled with disbelief that it twisted his gut. He dared a little more. With trembling fingers, he reached up to brush a strand of her hair away from her face. Her cheek leaned, ever so slightly, into his touch. "Why do they call you a weapon?" he asked, barely breathing the words. Aria's gaze fell. She seemed to gather herself from broken pieces scattered across centuries. When she answered, it was with a voice that could have crumbled. "Mountains. Because they never saw me cry," she said, and the tears spilled anew, floating between them like stars. Until now. The station groaned under the weight of forgotten ghosts. Elias didn't move. He didn't need to. In that suspended world between heartbeats, between fear and hope, between orders and instinct, he knew, whatever path lay ahead, he would not walk it without her, even if it tore the sky apart. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm that was both agonizing and beautiful. Elias returned to her each night when the station's corridors fell silent and the surveillance systems flickered into dormant sleep. Risking everything, he carved out stolen hours where he could simply exist near her. No monitors, no weapons drawn, no lies. At first, their meetings were little more than quiet observations. He would sit against the bulkhead, a careful distance, away, and speak of simple things. The color of the twin suns he had seen once over the dunes of Seren Prime, the way Earth's rain used to smell after a storm. Aria would listen, silent but enraptured, as if memorizing every detail like sacred scripture. She never interrupted. She never looked bored. It was as if each word he offered her was a lifeline, and in return, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to reveal pieces of herself. She spoke of the way she had been made, grown in artificial starscapes, molded by frequencies no human could hear. She had no childhood, no parents, only engineers and commanders who had praised her when she obeyed, punished her when she questioned. Her earliest memories were not lullabies, but calibrations, not stories, but simulations of war. Yet, somewhere, deep within, untouched and fiercely alive, was a part of her they could not erase. A part that still yearned for more than just commands, for connection, for choice, for meaning. One evening, as the station trembled under a passing asteroid shower, Elias found her kneeling by the magnetic shield, fingers brushing the invisible field that separated her from the stars. "Have you ever touched space?" she asked, voice full of wonder and sorrow all at once. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No one really touches it. It touches you if you're out there long enough." She turned to him, silver hair shifting like liquid light. "I wonder what it would feel like," she murmured, "to drift without purpose, without orders, just to be." The he. Simplicity of the wish struck him harder than any battle wound. For the first time in his life, Elias found himself without answers, without protocol, only raw, aching empathy. Without thinking, he crossed to her side, kneeling until their shoulders nearly touched. Carefully, he removed one of his gloves and pressed his bare hand against the shield. The field shimmered around his palm, humming with restrained energy. "Like this," he said softly. "It's cold, infinite. It reminds you how small you are. And somehow that's beautiful." She watched him for a long moment and then, trembling, mirrored his gesture, placing her hand over his with the shield buzzing between them. Two beings separated by layers of technology, history, and fear, yet still reaching. Their hands aligned, palm to palm, through the unseen wall. And for a heartbeat, the universe seemed to pause. A flicker of light danced across the shield where their fingers met, a phenomenon Elias had never seen before. A resonance, an answer. He looked at her, and in her eyes he saw something terrifying and extraordinary. Hope. Not the weapon he was warned about, not the project detailed in classified files. Just a girl who had never been given the chance to dream. The bay lights dimmed further as the station's core went into another low-power cycle. Darkness crept around them, wrapping them in a cocoon of near silence. For a moment, Elias allowed himself the dangerous thought, what if we ran? What if they slipped through the magnetic gates, disappeared into the infinite tapestry of stars? and never looked back. But reality clawed its way back into his chest. She couldn't even leave the field. Her body was coded, tracked, restrained by invisible tethers he couldn't yet understand. If freedom was to be hers, it wouldn't come easily. Still, as he sat there beside her, listening to the soft pulse of her breathing and the song of distant stars against the hull, a fierce resolve rooted itself in him. He would find a way, even if it cost him everything he knew, even if it meant defying the galaxy itself. Because in her he didn't just see what they feared, he saw what they had forgotten how to cherish, life, wonder, love. The change came subtly at first. Elias noticed it one evening when he arrived at the docking bay, slipping through the maintenance tunnels like a shadow. Aria wasn't waiting by the shield as she usually did. She wasn't watching the stars. She was curled up on the floor, her frame trembling violently, her hands clutching the restraints etched into her skin. Aria! Elias dropped to his knees beside the magnetic barrier, panic slamming through him. She barely lifted her head. Her luminous skin had dulled, her glow flickering like a dying signal. "They're recalibrating me," she gasped, her voice splintered with pain. "From afar, they think I'm malfunctioning." He pressed his hand uselessly against the shield, desperate to reach her. "Fight it," he whispered. "You have to fight it." Tears streamed from her eyes, not graceful pearls. Like before, but ragged, desperate sobs torn from the very core of her being. "How you don't understand," she cried. "If I resist, I'll trigger," she broke off, shuddering. Elias leaned closer, heart hammering against his ribs. "Trigger what?" Her fingers dug into the floor, leaving faint, glowing scratches. "A fail-safe, built into me, to destroy the station." The blood drained from his face. Her weapon, a ticking time bomb. That was the truth buried beneath the fear and propaganda. But looking at her now, broken, terrified, fighting her own engineered instincts, he didn't see a threat. He saw a prisoner desperately trying to cling to her soul. "I won't let that happen," Elias said fiercely, the words burning in his throat. "I swear to you, Aria, I won't let them take you away from yourself." A small, broken laugh escaped her. "You can't even touch me." "Maybe not yet," he said quietly. "But you're stronger than they ever imagined. You're not just a weapon, you're a person, Aria. You feel, you choose. And I will find a way to free you, no matter what it takes." Her eyes locked onto his, wide, with disbelief and raw hope battling inside. Before either of them could say more, a low siren began to wail through the distant corridors. Faint, muffled, but unmistakable. They had noticed. Someone had noticed. Footsteps echoed in the distance, heavy, methodical, drawing nearer with each breathless second. Elias snapped into action. He pulled a small device from his belt, a data spike, illegal, stolen during a long-ago mission he'd barely survived. He jammed it into the maintenance port by the shield's control panel. The system hissed in protest, but the magnetic field shimmered and faltered. For the first time, the air between them was truly open. Aria flinched backward, instinctively fear flashing across her face. "It's okay," Elias said, keeping his hands visible, his movements slow. "I'm not here to cage you. I'm here to get you out." Her breaths came fast and shallow, silver sparks leaping along her skin. The programming inside her must have been screaming to obey, to retaliate, to destroy. But her heart, her fragile, stubborn heart was louder. Tentatively, painfully, she reached for him. Their fingers brushed, and this time when their hands met, there was no shield, no energy field, no barriers, just skin against skin, human warmth against alien wonder. Two souls refusing to be enemies. A surge of sensation tore through Elias, memories not his own flashing in fragmented visions. A sterile lab bathed in harsh white light, cold hands fastening restraints, her silent screams swallowed by indifferent walls. And then, faint and trembling, a memory of her standing alone under an alien sky, arms outstretched, hoping, praying for someone to see her. Elias gasped, staggering under the weight of it. Aria yanked her hand back, eyes wide with horror. "I didn't mean to, I'm sorry." "No," he said hoarsely, "don't apologize, I saw you." The sirens grew louder, Orders barked through crackling comm systems. They were coming. He grabbed her hand again, more firmly this time. "Aria, listen to me. There's a maintenance shaft under the docking rails. I can override it. We can get to a transport pod, but you have to trust me. You have to choose to come with me." Her gaze darted past him, toward the security forces storming through the corridors, weapons drawn, armor gleaming under emergency lights. The old Aria, the programmed weapon, would have obeyed the codes seared into her mind, would have unleashed devastation. But this Aria, the one who had cried, who had listened, who had dreamed, this Aria hesitated, and then, with a shuddering breath, she squeezed his hand. "I choose," she whispered. "I choose to live." Without wasting another second, Elias yanked open the maintenance hatch, pulling her down into the labyrinth of darkness beneath the bay, just as the first security team burst into the room, weapons raised, shots rang out. Sparks erupted overhead. The world above them became a storm of violence. But below, in the narrow confines of the forgotten shaft, two figures clung to each other, one human, one born from the stars, running, stumbling, bleeding, but alive. Alive. And free, for now. The darkness of the maintenance shaft felt endless. Elias led the way, every step echoing off the cold metal walls, the harsh pulse of emergency lights flickering sporadically overhead. Each breath they took seemed to vibrate in the confined space, every inhale a reminder of the risks they were facing. Aria, just behind him, moved like a shadow, faster than humanly possible, but graceful. Her movements always calculated, always poised. Despite the frantic situation, there was a strange serenity in her presence, a quiet stillness that seemed to hum in contrast with the chaos above. But even that serenity was slipping. Her once silver skin had dulled to a faint shimmer, and her pulse, Elias could feel it even through the grip of her hand, was erratic, a sharp, irregular beat that threatened to tear her apart. She was fighting, and every second, Elias could feel the strain of that fight pulling at her. "Aria," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Are you okay?" Her eyes flickered to him, the silver in her irises dimming, almost mournful. I don't know." For a moment, Elias didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. They were both running blind, racing against a countdown neither of them could hear. He had to get her out. The shaft was a labyrinth of pipes and conduits, twisting and narrowing at every turn. Sweat beaded on his brow, his muscles screaming with each sprinting step. But he couldn't slow down, they couldn't afford to stop. The station's central security grid was already in motion, troops swarming the halls, scanning for their escape route. It was only a matter of time before they would close in. The hum of machinery filled the air, sharp and grating as they rounded a corner. There, down the corridor ahead, a faint glimmer of light. Elias picked up the pace, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. He didn't stop until they reached the end of the shaft. The old emergency transport pod was there, still functional, rusted but reliable. He pressed his palm to the launchpad interface, his fingers shaking as they slid across the controls. A confirmation screen blinked to life, giving him a moment of fragile hope, until it flashed red. Access denied. He cursed under his breath. "What's wrong?" Aria asked, her voice strained but calm. She stepped beside him, her cool fingers brushing the side of his hand. "They've locked the system down," he muttered, swiping the panel again. "The station's firewall is preventing access. We are trapped unless we can override it." Aria stepped back, and for the first time since they'd met, Elias saw a flicker of something darker in her expression, an almost imperceptible shift in her composure. Her fingers twitched, not in fear but in something else. "Let me try." Elias raised an eyebrow, uncertain. "What are you—" But before he could finish, she reached forward, her hand hovering over the terminal. There was a flash of light from her fingertips, followed by a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the walls of the station. The panels shimmered briefly as her bioelectrical signature began to interface with the pod's controls. It was then that Elias realized she wasn't just part of the system, so she was the system. Her eyes glowed faintly, a soft silver hue that deepened with concentration. The air around them seemed to pulse with her energy, every fiber of her being connecting to the very heart of the station. The display blinked once, twice, and then finally the confirmation appeared. Override successful. The pod's engines roared to life, the sound of them filling the small confined space with a triumphant hum. "We're going," Elias said, his voice thick with disbelief. He grinned at her, the first true smile he had given in what felt like forever. "You did it." But Aria didn't smile back. Her face was pale, drawn, as if the energy required for that single act had drained her completely. Her breathing was labored, and the flickering light in her eyes was fading. "You need to get in now," she said quietly, stepping back toward the pod's entrance. "Before they find us," Elias hesitated. "Aria, go!" Her voice was sharp, filled with urgency. The walls trembled as another explosion rang out somewhere above. The security teams were closing in. He didn't argue. He reached for her arm, but she pulled away before he could touch her. "Now, Elias." Reluctantly, he stepped into the transport pod and activated the launch sequence. The door slammed shut, the dim lights inside flickering to life. Outside the pod, he saw the emergency hatch, close, sealing them in. He glanced over at Aria, but she was staring out the viewports, her expression unreadable. The pod began to move, slowly at first, before breaking free of the station's gravitational pull. They were escaping. But as the station grew smaller behind them, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. He looked at Aria again and his heart sank. She was trembling, her hands shaking at her sides, her head hung low, as though the weight of something unimaginable was pressing down on her. "Aria?" She turned to him, but her gaze seemed distant, as if she wasn't really seeing him at all. "Do you know," she said softly, her voice a fragile whisper against the hum of the pod's engines, "that I've never been free before? Not once, not even when I was told I would be." Her words cut through him like a blade, and Elias didn't know how to respond. How could he? All he could do was take her hand in his, holding it tight. "You're free now," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "You're free, Aria, we're both free." For a moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since they met, her lips trembled into something resembling a smile, a fragile, hesitant thing, but a smile nonetheless. But that fragile moment was shattered by the shriek of alarms blaring from the ship's control panel. Elias spun around, his stomach dropping, as he saw the flashing red lights. The coordinates had changed. The pod wasn't headed for the nearest safe zone. It was being pulled off course, and there, in the cold, dark expanse of space, a new threat loomed ahead. "Engines locked," Elias muttered under his breath, panic flooding his chest. "We're not alone." Aria's grip on his hand tightened, her eyes going wide as the pod was dragged toward the incoming force. "Look," she said, her voice trembling now. "Look at what they've sent after us." And then, from the deep black of space, something massive and terrifying emerged. A ship. Not just any ship. It was a warship, a hunting vessel, and it was coming for them. The warship loomed ahead, its colossal shape swallowing the stars as it moved steadily toward them. The metal of its hull glinted like a predator in the void, its engines thrumming with a low, menacing hum that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. The pod's systems were locked, its trajectory set in stone by an invisible force that they couldn't escape. Aria's grip on his hand tightened, her breath shallow and quick. She wasn't trembling anymore, not from the cold or fear, but from something deeper, more primal. She could feel the weight of the danger too. Elias saw it in her eyes, a flicker of something she had tried so desperately to suppress, something she had been running from her whole life, her true nature, the weapon they had built her to be. "No," Elias whispered under his breath. More to himself than to her. "We can't go back to that." But even as the words left his lips, he felt the ship's gravitational pull drawing them closer, the pod unable to break free. There was no escape. "Aria," he said, his voice steady despite the panic roaring in his chest. "You have to stop this. You can't let them take control of you again." Her eyes darted toward him, her silver irises flashing dangerously. The warship's shadow stretched over them, a suffocating presence. Her hand released his, fingers shaking, as if she were fighting the urge to tear something apart. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice strained. "I was made for this. I don't know how to be anything else." He reached for her again, this time with both hands, his heart in his throat. "You're not just a weapon, Aria. You're so much more than that. I've seen it in you. I've felt it. I know you. You feel. You choose. And right now, I'm asking you to choose us." Her eyes locked onto his, and for a long, tense moment they simply stared at each other, two souls adrift in the vastness of space, struggling against everything that had been forced upon them. Then, slowly, she blinked. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she closed her eyes. The warship was almost upon them, its weapons primed, its engines screaming with the promise of destruction. But Aria was no longer listening to the call of her programming. With a gasp, she threw her hands up, her body convulsing as she fought to contain the energy surging through her. Her skin flashed brighter, her entire form pulsing with a raw, uncontained power. The pod began to shake violently, the hull creaking under the strain of her force. Elias staggered back, caught between awe and terror as she strained to keep the warship from seizing control of their fate. "Hold on," she whispered through clenched teeth, her voice barely audible over the chaos of the systems failing and the ship closing in. Elias gritted his teeth, his pulse thundering. He reached out for her, his hands finding her shoulders, steadying her. "Aria, don't do this alone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm with you. Whatever happens, I'm with you." A faint, fragile smile tugged at her lips as she opened her eyes filled not with the cold, calculating rage of a weapon, but with something else, something human. "I know," she said softly. "I know." With one last cry of effort, she pushed, her hands forward, and in a burst of brilliant light, a force unlike anything Elias had ever felt exploded from her. The pod jolted violently, the gravitational pull weakening just enough for them to break free. The warship was caught in the blast, its systems glitching as it began to veer off course, unable to track their escape. Elias's heart pounded as the pod surged forward, the proximity alarms blaring wildly in the background. The massive shadow of the warship receded behind them, slowly dissolving into the void. They were free. But it wasn't over yet. The pod's systems were damaged, lights flickering, and the interface flashing error codes. They were out of immediate danger, but they weren't safe, not yet. The warship had been a warning, not the end. "We need to keep moving," Elias said, his voice hoarse. "We can't let them track us again." Aria slumped back against the seat, exhaustion radiating from her, her body trembling with the aftermath of the battle she'd fought. Not against an enemy, but against herself, against everything they had made her to be. "I don't know how long I can keep this up," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll come for us, Elias. They won't stop." Elias kneeled beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. He could see the toll the escape had taken on her, the drain of using the energy that had been locked inside her for so long. But in her eyes, despite everything, he saw something different now, a flicker of hope, of trust. "We'll find a way," he said, his voice strong, more certain than he felt. "They may come for us, Aria, but they won't win. We'll find our place, somewhere far from all of this." Her gaze softened, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, her shoulders relaxed. She leaned into him, not as a weapon, not as something made for destruction, but as a woman who had found something worth protecting. The pod drifted silently through space, the stars stretching out before them, endless and vast. Elias held her close, feeling the steady rhythm of her breath against his chest. They were no longer running, no longer fleeing into the darkness. They were forging their own path together, and for the first time there was peace. But deep within the cold expanse of space, far beyond the limits of the stars they could see, an unseen presence watched, silent, waiting, and this time, it was not the machines that would hunt them. It was the galaxy itself. But for now, just for now, they were free, and with that, the story reaches its emotional, cinematic closure. The bond between Elias and Aria, forged in the fires of danger and fear, is stronger than ever. But the galaxy is vast, and the future remains uncertain. If this journey through the stars moved you, share it with someone who loves powerful tales from distant worlds. Don't forget to like and let us know in the comments. What would you have done